Welcome to the Everyday Magic Podcast. I'm Anya Rock.
And I'm Dr. Sophia Trivena.
And we've been talking over the last few episodes about where we were, where we are, things that are alive for us, intuition, money, sex. And we realized that 2020 was actually a pivotal year for both of us, a transformational year, as I believe it was for everybody. And we thought maybe today we would dive into the stories of each of our personal, we really each had an awakening in 2020.
Mm-hmm. And I think it's interesting because we were like, what are we going to talk about in the podcast? And we decided to pull cards. And I pulled the card and it said Sophia. And you pulled the card and it was like inner child.
Mm-hmm.
And I instantly, when you pulled yours for inner child, I instantly flashed to your 2020 awakening moment where you realized you had to go into your inner child and do some healing. So do you want to talk about that?
Yeah. So in 2020, I got a Facebook message from the person who had sexually abused me as a child. And the Facebook message just said, "Are you mad at me?" There was like, I heard that you wrote about us in your diary. I hope you're not mad. I took a screenshot of it. It's somewhere. And I just remember in that moment being like, oh, this is the feeling when people say they're triggered, which was never my favorite word. I was like, this is what they mean. And just felt sort of my whole nervous system kind of go into that like state of activation, being activated. I was like, oh my gosh. And at the time I was writing, I had a writing teacher. I was writing just for creative expression, not for any kind of purpose, but I had a writing coach and I was writing and I asked her, I said, I think I need a therapist. I think I really have some work here to do. My daughter at the time was the same age. She was 9, which is the age that I was when that sexual abuse was happening. And I was really recognizing as I was watching her and seeing her as a child, for the first time, I was seeing that I was a child.
When that happened to you?
That I was, yeah, I really, I think when we have experienced trauma, there's a part of our brain that's kind of like, this is just how it is. This is who I am. It's okay. And I've been in therapy many times in my whole life. But what I say now is that I sort of footnoted the experience. I was like, okay, this happened to me. It's kind of part of my identity and I'm going to put it over there and not deal with it. And when that Facebook message came in, it was my knock on the door. It was kind of, Brené Brown has a quote in her book. I definitely heard her say it on a podcast. She said, the universe will tap you on the shoulder at some point in your life and say, the armor that you're wearing is no longer serving you. And in fact, it's holding you back from expressing your gifts. And I heard that podcast maybe a year later in Florida, and I was walking and I stopped and had to like write the quote down because I was like, that is what happened to me. That Facebook message was the universe's invitation to wake up and to go back and heal. And to see in my daughter, her childlike innocence, she was prepubescent child. And I just thought like, I can't imagine that happening to her. And then I went back and looked for photos of myself at that age to really like put the two together.
Yeah.
To reconcile that child and that experience. And I found an incredible somatic therapist who is a guide and a mentor to me today. And I did the work of healing, of going back, and I'm mining for, the compassion, for the healing, for, there's a theory in some healing that when we have traumatic events, parts of our soul like splits. And I did this process called a soul retrieval. It was a meditation where I kind of went back and called back the parts of myself and done a lot of inner child work and healing and tending to the parts of myself that needed mothering, the parts of myself that reached out for help or assistance, and there was no one there to help. And now I can go back and heal. So that was really the invitation. And it set me off on a journey of understanding who I had become and how I had managed and coped. I actually, so I was 9 when it happened, and I lived with that family for a year. So it continued on for a year. And then my mother didn't find out until many years later. I had written in my diary in my teen years, and my memory is that I was depressed and she was going through a divorce and my whole life was kind of falling apart. And at some point she went into my room and looked in my diary and read this revelation and kind of went into mama bear, like fix everything. And that was my first experience of therapy, right? I was kind of sent off into therapy. And it was also the first time where I realized that, or I don't know if I realized, but in dealing with that as a family, my family chose not to talk about it. So I knew now that everybody in my family knew, and no one wanted to talk about it.
Whoa.
And it was purposely silenced. So there was also a ton of shame that went with that. Like there was already so much shame tied in and woven into this like 9-year-old expression of sexuality at such a young age. And now on top of that, I have the, teen years of realizing like, oh, we don't talk about this. This is my experience is less important than like all the adults' experience of this. And I carried that for a long, long time. And in a very kind of like, I don't know if the word is like nonchalant, but like in a kind of like, oh, I've got this. Like this happened. It's no big deal. It's part of my history. It's fine. And so the 2020 moment when that cracked open for me in seeing my daughter and reconciling who I was, that little girl, how unprotected I was, how the adults just never took accountability, and realizing in his message, what was kind of most shocking was that I realized that he had never been held accountable because he had to ask, right? Like, I heard that you wrote about us. Meant to me, and I don't know if this is true or not, but meant to me that no one ever sat down with him and really like made it plainly clear that this was not okay.
Right.
So the journey from there was really about, healing, as it maybe feels cliche, but it was really reclaiming those parts of myself and really understanding what I was managing as a young child that was just beyond the scope of what I needed to be or had the capacity to, these very adult situations. And then also the feeling of, because my mother was single and had been most of our life. And then I had a stepfather who around that time, they were divorcing in a very messy, ugly process. I was always acutely aware of like her well-being. And it was always my responsibility. These things are never spoken, right? It's never like, oh, it's your responsibility. But it's like we take those things on as children because we're so aware of like, we want to stay safe. We need our environment to be safe. And so what's the best way to be safe? To keep the peace, to keep everybody okay.
Well, you don't have capacity to deal with what's going on inside. You don't have the maturity.
Right.
And so you manage what you can, which is taking care of your mother.
Yeah. I mean, I'm still very much on that journey, but it's been 5 years of beginning to ask, what did that mean for me? How, we really kind of like take the snow globe, shake it up, look at everything, look at all the parts, look at my dynamic with my mom, look at my father, who I didn't know my biological father, and what those relationship dynamics had created for me. And then really starting to look at my willingness to ask for what I want. I think that was like kind of the biggest.
Because your wants had never been on the table to look at or prioritize. You had so much to
Right.
manage and trying to keep the world safe around you.
Yeah. And I start my book with the question, which I asked. I was sitting in my car in a parking lot in Florida, wearing my pajamas with a coffee in the console. And I had left my house. We were staying at a house. When my father passed away, he left me a house in Florida, and we had gone there mid-COVID.
You and I had gone there too.
Yeah. But in this sort of late COVID, I took the family from Chicago and we went to Florida just to escape the cold lockdown. And so we're all like holed up in this little house, and it's like 2,000 square feet, tiny. Everyone's on Zoom school. And I leave in the morning and I go to my therapy appointment in the car in the parking lot. And the night before, a friend had called and said that her and her husband were separating. And they were each going to mutually date. They were going to stay married, but be ethically non-monogamous, a word I'd never heard before. And they were each going to start dating. And I remember my husband said, "Are you envious of that? Like, do you wish you were dating?" And I was like, whoa, there's a maybe. And I said to my therapist in that car on that cold Florida morning, I was like, where is my desire? And it felt like a question that as I spoke it, opened up something. Like it opened a portal of possibility, but also fear. I was like, oh boy, this one has some weight to it. Like if I pull this thread, the whole thing might come apart. And the thread really was like, how am I in this marriage where there's no intimacy, where we are friends, we are, good co-parenting, but there's just not intimacy. And what do I want? And is this it? Is this all there is? And I think there must be something more. And those questions kind of led me to begin to ask. And what I desired most of the time was to move my family to California. And it had been so hard for me to ask my family to do this crazy thing for me, to leave their friends and their school and their jobs and their life and follow my dream. And I did. It was like in doing that, I really like put something in the ground and said, my needs matter. I really want this. This is where my soul is calling me.
What comes up for you now while you say it?
I don't have any regret about the way the journey that we're on and where life leads us, but just knowing that it was such a desire for so long that I put aside for so many other people's needs and wants.
So you're mourning still.
Yeah.
How much you buried about who you are and what you want.
Yeah. But that was a really huge moment in reclaiming. And then shortly after we moved, I realized that I actually didn't want to be married anymore, that I was really longing for something more, that I deserve more, want more, that he deserves more, wants more, that this wasn't our path anymore. And sort of that fast forwards us to who I am today, right? Living this co-parenting life. I say, living my best life, but in two places.
Yes.
And I spent a lot of time mourning. There's so much joy, and there's also so much grief in knowing that like I didn't become a parent to be a half-time parent.
Yeah.
And yet I know that for the first time, my children are really seeing me authentically stand for and ask for and magnetize what I deserve in this life.
Yes.
Yeah. And I do know that's more important than anything. And they reflect it to me. I've quit drinking. I started microdosing. This whole process has allowed me to reawaken and be completely re-embodied. And I know that my children see it and reflect it to me, that I'm a more present, available parent, and even just like a nicer person.
A can totally see this. I love all of this. Thank you for sharing.
Mm.
Can we go back through this story? Because I feel like what really stood out for me when you were speaking, and you're the one that taught me this, I'm going to say at least 20 years ago, you said to me, look, it's not what happened, it's the meaning that we make from what happened. And you said, you can imagine a little girl and she says, I want a doll for my birthday. I want a doll for my birthday. I want a doll. And she gets a train. Does she say, oh, I never get what I want, I'm never asking again? Or does she say, oh, well, I guess I just have to wait till next year, I'll make the most of this? Or does she say, this is amazing, there must be a reason I have a train, what's so great about a train? You taught me that, and I have shared it to so many people, and I've used it so much in my own life. And it's about the meaning making. And when you're 9 years old and you have someone older than you taking you into experience that no 9-year-old is ready for and doesn't have any structure for meaning making, and I would say that I have my version of that, and I feel like anyone watching this would have their version of like, something happened that was not appropriate to me at a time where I couldn't make meaning from it. I'm just curious, I heard you say the word shame. How do you feel like you translated that to shame as a 9-year-old?
Well, I think in the very beginning experience, because our bodies are wired for pleasure. So when I'm experiencing pleasure as a 9-year-old, but I know that what we're doing is wrong.
So you had a sense that what you're doing is wrong.
For sure.
That's why
otherwise we it was like, don't tell anyone.
Oh, he said, don't tell anyone.
Yeah, so this was like completely our secret.
Oh, and when he said, don't tell anyone, did you think it was a secret because you're bad, or it's just a secret because...
Yeah, because this is wrong. We're not supposed to be doing this. So then pleasure
and wrong
got
mapped on together.
Totally.
Absolutely. And what other choice did you have except for to have the experience and to do what he told you? Because otherwise you would have had to say, this doesn't feel right to me, stop. And who's teaching a 9-year-old to do that?
Right. And because of the circumstances of life at the moment, my mom was traveling with my stepfather. And so I was moving in with that family.
So if you say no to him, you don't have a bed to sleep in or a home or
and
a roof.
I'm going into their home, right? So now
You're the guest. You have to be the good girl.
Right.
Oof, and make it all...
I mean, we had sex in their basement basically for a year.
Whoa.
And I think I was in 4th grade.
Oh my God.
Yeah.
Oh my God.
I mean, I had to sit down. I did a founder story video. I talked about this, and I had to sit down with my mom and say, like, I need you to sit down with me and have a conversation and know that, like, I am no longer keeping this secret. This is no longer mine to keep. And whoever has a problem with it, whoever's name comes out or whoever wants to have any reaction they have, they're welcome to. But it is no longer mine to keep. I'm going to tell my story. I'm going to own it. And I think that's how we take shame and we bring light to it, right?
Right.
I've learned shame dissipates as soon as we bring awareness and compassion and attention. It actually burns up really fast. But nothing festers shame like silence and secrecy.
That's a big takeaway. That is a big takeaway.
That's a Brene Brown takeaway. I mean, she is the queen of really understanding, right? She's the shame teacher.
Okay. Wow. And you came to that since 2020, since you went on this journey of opening it up and doing deep therapy. And part of that result was going to your mom. So if I were to discover that something that I had taken an experience I had that was my innocence and I was actually the true victim of it, but I had turned it into shame, what would you recommend for me to do from what you learned?
I mean, there's real power in just telling the story.
To who?
To anyone who will listen.
Really? Like a therapist or?
To a therapist. I mean, I think that was having the safe space of having someone who could really reflect to me, like, you were a child. It wasn't your job to fix this. You didn't have the capacity. So that therapist, and then eventually, I mean, I don't think I could sit on a podcast 4 years ago and have this conversation. Right? Or it would have been like, oh, this thing happened. It was kind of like, we're not really digging into the meat of it. And it is really because I recognize the shame isn't mine.
Right. And it was really in the telling someone else and bringing light to it.
Yeah. And the understanding of how I was let down by the adults in the situation.
Okay, so here's another thing of meaning. So there's the meaning at the moment that was about the shame that carried through until you brought light to it. And then there's when you bring light to it, that shame turns into a truth that the adults didn't protect you. What did you do with that?
That I had to just reconcile. I mean, some of which you can't go back and fix, right? So we're not going to go back and change what happened. I can reconcile that in my relationship with my mother. I mean, my journey with my mom is one of forgiveness and compassion. She did the best she could with the tools she had, but it was a bit of a journey to get there. And understanding that I now, as a mother, also, I think so much of this comes from I'm doing this healing so I can break these generational curses, right? That in reclaiming, in bringing light to these kind of historical things. I mean, my daughter will watch this podcast one day and hear this story, right? And get to know this part of my story differently and know that, there was a point at which I was like, no sleepovers for my kids.
I remember.
Yeah. And my therapist celebrates now. And I'm like, my daughter went to a sleepover. She's like, just want to remind you that's huge growth for you. Not that there's definitely an argument to be made about sleepovers being appropriate at different times of life. But and also, for me, it was such a black and white, like need to protect and coming to a place as a mother where I can say like, okay, I can protect you. I can also inform you. I can give you the tools. Yeah. And at some point I have to let go.
You're right. All of that. So every single piece of that is so huge. I really get this. I feel like people have sexual assault happen to them at 25 or 50, and they still are ill-equipped to deal with it. And I think regardless of age, you have an innocence inside of you that is not expecting to have something like this happen to you, and you're not equipped for it. And almost everyone I know that I've worked with and that I've experienced myself goes to shame. And then when that shame gets pushed aside, there's more to deal with. And I do believe that forgiveness, like I think Brene Brown also says, when you really get to the reality of a situation, everyone's at fault, but no one's to blame. It's like everyone was doing what they thought was okay or the best that they could, and that doesn't make it okay. But in the case of your mom, she thought she was doing her best by being away for you if she had known that was happening to you. Right. So those types of things. Yeah. And then so all of this, just being your friend on the outside, I remember talking to you when you were going through this, and you said, I have my desk in the basement, and I feel like I'm really going through this deep thing, and I think it's good that I'm in the basement because I'm sort of in the subconscious of my world, digging out the basement of my history. But now I'm realizing, like, you actually had the assault in the basement, which I never realized. And just putting that together now. And I feel like there was just a real re-immersion into what was happening there. And then I remember you starting to, it's just seeing like you coming out and out and out as you did this healing. So we've talked about sort of the healing journey. Let's talk about the rebirthing journey. Like, what then, when you got rid of that, because you're peeling away all of this suppression and all this buried stuff, but when you get rid of it, there's the you, like there's you waiting. So what happened when you started meeting yourself, your desire?
I mean, it was twofold, right? It's kind of like, oh, there I am. I get to have this. I get to be this full expression of myself, and a feeling of like, I'm never going back.
And when you say going back to what?
Going back, almost like I imagine like going back in the box, right? It's like Pandora's box is like I found this new version of myself. It's one of the reasons why my marriage ended, was that I was on this spiritual quest of like discovering myself, meeting myself. And for me, my experience was that as I was on the path, I didn't actually know where it was leading. I just knew I kept saying yes to the next thing and the next experience, and went to Reiki healing and I would take this process, or I would say yes to a retreat with my therapist, and like just keep saying yes and discovering. And now I can look back at the whole book and go like, oh, I understand why it all had to happen that way. But each part of the journey was like, oh, there I am, and meeting myself as beautiful and innocent and having desire and playfulness and joy that comes from a different place, not a performative place, but a really exuberance is the word that like comes to mind. And as I grew and changed and kind of evolved through this spiritual and healing awakening, my partner didn't go on that journey with me.
So common. Oh my gosh, so common.
And I remember him saying like, I don't like this version of you. And I said, I feel more like myself than I ever have. So where does that leave us?
Leaves you hanging out with me.
Yeah.
Like, more. Come on, more.
And you know, I'm kind of more into the divorce process. I'm so grateful for a great co-parent, and I have a lot of compassion, right? And I know that it takes two to be in a relationship, to partner. And there were things he did, things I did, but we ultimately didn't commit to growing together on the journey.
Sure.
And there were things I wanted to explore and places I wanted to go and find about myself, and he just wasn't interested.
Oh my goodness.
And that ultimately kind of left us with like, we don't want to do the same things. We don't like the same things. We don't have that common ground other than kids and practices and all those things.
Here's a question I have all the time. I feel like so many people have a great partnership in the family, but in family creation, but then they lose the intimacy with each other, et cetera. This is really common. I'm just wondering, do you think there's actually a partner you're meant to have children with, and then like a different partner that you're supposed to have a passionate love affair with after different phases? Different people are meant for different parts of your life? Or do you think, knowing what you know now, you just would have chosen totally different and tried to have it all in one person?
I don't know. I think that couples, again, in theory, who stay together through these, longer chapters probably have to continue recommitting to the new version of each other. Right? Mm-hmm. I remember someone saying like, there should be an expiration after like 10 years of marriage. You should have to like re-opt in.
Right.
But even more,
some would say 7.
Yeah. Or every year, right?
Yeah.
Something that says like,
for me, it's every moment. Like, I feel like there is no longevity commitment. There is like how you're treated and how you show up every day, and that there's a deep commitment to keeping it going. But I've been guided into the 3-month rule for deal breakers. So if deal breaker comes on the table and it can't be really worked on in 3 months, that is the justification for an end of a relationship, regardless. Or you have to change your deal breaker and accept that this is going to. Bottom line, if someone really is trying to change it, it's going to change in 3 months.
Right.
And if they don't, then it's going to be something you're living with.
Yeah.
And do you choose that or not? And so, I don't know, for me, there's definitely more. But then when you have children, it's very different. And then you can say, well, with children, you're supposed to stay. But people are divorcing with 2-year-olds, and it's really prominent.
And I don't know if there's one answer. I mean, there's so nuanced.
Yeah.
I do know that I'm a different person because I chose to do this healing work, to really be in my wholeness, know myself. And I'm grateful. I mean, I was saying to someone the other day, like, it's only been 5 years. It feels like it's been a 10-year journey, but it's really only a pretty quick chapter. And so much has changed. I mean, I went, even really from the time I moved to California, it's really like 2022, 23, and 24 were like big years. And accelerated. I just was like on an accelerated path of like blowing things up, burning them down, anything that wasn't aligned. It was like, I am just not wasting any more time with things that aren't aligned, because I spent so long doing what was expected, or I don't know, it just felt like suppressing. We talked about that, like suppressing that creative, that desire to move to California, to
It's always interesting to me. I remember when you and your husband met in New York, and he was moving to Chicago for a job, and you followed him and stayed there for over a decade and had a family there in a city you never wanted to be in or intended on being in. But when it was time to go, so you followed his dream and no one even talked about it.
Yeah.
But the following of your dream was a big deal and a huge sacrifice. Was there ever a conversation where you had made a big sacrifice for him to be in?
Yeah, no.
Never.
No.
Yeah, it's just
no. And in fact, like in a conversation as we were separating, I remember him saying something like, you know, we never would have moved if you hadn't got your dad's money. And I was like, I remember just like hitting me. We were in a therapy session when it happened. And I said to him later, like, I had to just take a moment because the reality hit me, the truth, which was that I had been asking for almost our whole marriage. Every now and then I'd be like, move to California? Still going to do that? Can we move to LA? And it was always a no. And it just was like this truth bomb that hit me like, oh, right. You were never going to do that.
Unless I paid for everything.
Yeah.
And imagine this, still staying in California or still staying in Chicago because you followed me. Are you still okay with the fact that you followed me and we're still here? How are you doing with the fact that you gave up everything and followed me here and we're still here?
Right. Yeah.
Where's that conversation? Right.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. It doesn't come up.
Yeah. There's a whole section of my latest book on centering the man's worldview. And again, women are programmed to do that, even if they're not financially dependent on the man. But it's 12,000 years of patriarchy that made it that if you can center his survival, you center your own survival.
Yeah.
And even if that's not true anymore, we still do it.
And, you know, I talked to my therapist about this a lot. Growing up without a father, I was sort of like ripe for the like, oh, I'm going to center this man who's choosing me.
Oh my gosh, I have another section called the hypnosis of being chosen.
Yeah. And, you know, a lot of my work is about choosing myself and just the absence of that. You know, you sometimes say like the absence of that father was beneficial in some ways.
I see you free of a lot of the things that a lot of women I know struggle with from dysfunctional things with their father. You didn't have that dysfunction. You had an absence.
Right.
Different
and
kind
in that absence, there becomes a longing.
Right. Right.
And then the longing becomes something that we're trying to fill.
Right.
And so now I have the tools and I have the support and the community to understand, oh, there's that and how I'm healing that. It's one of the reasons why I am, we talked on a episode recently about the things that light me up and the practices and being in my sensuality and being on this podcast and talking about sex and money and intuition as the things that might be taboo and are for a lot of people.
Yeah.
And there are, I think in a room of 10 women, 8 of us will raise our hand and say, yes, we were sexually abused in some way by someone. We understand. And the way that I related then to sex through my life, right? That sexual experience set me up for a lot of other not so great sexual experiences.
Totally. Yeah, absolutely. A ricochet. What would you say to women about shame?
I would say it's just not yours. It's not yours.
As my grandpa said, just because they don't own up to it doesn't mean they don't own it.
Yeah. And just find someone, right? I think that more than ever, therapy is normalized. I encourage my children. My son goes to therapy. My daughter's kind of not into it right now, but it's a very normal part of our conversation that understanding that the skill of being able to talk through our feelings and our experiences is just like going to the dentist, going to the doctor. Like these are normal parts of life.
Keeping things clean.
Yeah.
And healthy.
And so if you are struggling with something, whether it was last week or 2 decades ago, I think go on the journey,
right?
Because the journey can bring really beautiful gifts.
Mm-hmm.
And in July of last year, my then husband, we were at his parents' 50th wedding anniversary, which I went to they didn't know yet that we were going to separate.
I remember this.
And I was like, fine, we'll go and we'll pretend everything's fine. And on that trip, I found out in the same day that the cousin who had abused me and also my stepfather had both passed away. Not in the same time frame, but I got the Facebook seems to be the way these messages come to me. I got Facebook messages from people and found out. I remember sitting in an Airbnb and just being like, whoa, that is pretty profound that these two important male energies, masculine presences in my life, both of whom
didn't protect you,
didn't protect me, have moved on to another realm. And especially as I step into this era of telling my story.
Yep.
Very interesting.
What do you make of it now? What meaning do you make looking back on that?
I mean, it sort of set me free in a way, right? Knowing that I can have these conversations and he's not on the other side of this podcast watching.
Sure.
And yet I think there are really brave women having those conversations knowing that that person is.
Yeah.
But for me, it was also like a chapter closing. It's
Sure.
just like, okay, that part of my life, because they were actually in the same chapter.
Sure.
That stepfather and him.
Oh, this is interesting. Yeah.
That whole chapter is closed.
Right.
And now it's like, you are really free to move on and write the story as you want to write it.
And the last thing I want to ask you about this is, where's your desire now? What happened with your desire? It wasn't there when this started. Now, 5 years later.
My desire is front and center.
What do you think made it so?
Putting it there. Really intentionally putting it there. I'm almost at the end of a pleasure coaching certification with the master of the divine feminine, which is Mama Gina. And it was really an edge for me of like, okay, this is kind of the last frontier of, again, diving into like, what are all the stories around like how we show up, or getting on a call and like being in our lingerie, or being in our womanly feminine. And
because you literally show up to go to class for the certification and all the women are in their lingerie.
In my lingerie, yeah. And I remember taking the same, like she did a master class and I took it, I think in 2018. So kind of before all this happened. And I remember showing up and being like, what is happening? Why is everyone like, didn't get the memo about the lingerie? And I was out, just not having it.
No way. So 2018, you're out.
Yeah. Couldn't do it.
No way.
Totally.
Wow.
And then fast forward to now and I'm like, oh, right. This is because it's really my birth given right to have this erotic blueprint, to have this turned on energy, not for the male consumption, not for the male gaze, but for me, for my aliveness. I remember with my therapist, she talks about like a rigid split happening when we have these sexual experiences or traumatic sexual experiences, particularly when we're coming into our sexuality in those sort of puberty years. And the hard split is like the split between the heart, right? The heart chakra and the sacral chakra, between our sexual creative energy and our heart energy. And people with a rigid split often have like a person they love and then an erotic fantasy person. People end up in affairs. Like I can love my partner and be in relationship with my partner, but in order to act out my sexual fantasies, I have to have this.
It's got to be linked with bad.
It's got to be linked with it's
secret,
an affair. It's and we often essentially reenact the wound.
That's right.
And she would have me visualize or ask me to visualize like a flame in my sacral and a flame in my heart and try to like bring them together. And it was nearly impossible for me. And what I feel has happened through this journey is the integration of my sacral, sexual, creative energy, the feminine, and my heart energy. And like all of me has integrated into the wholeness that I am today.
Ooh. Yes, goddess. Yes.
Mic drop.
Boom. Desire.
Check. Front and center. Like what? And really waking up each morning in this pleasure practice, right? Connecting with my pussy energy.
What does that mean?
It means like I put a hand on my pussy. I like connect with my energy. And I really ask, like, what do you desire? What do you desire out of today? Like, in gratitude for creation of this podcast, right? That it was like a pussy-led vision. It was like a desire-led vision. We desire to have this expression, this platform to express creatively.
So
I remember the book sitting on my
which book?
Pussy, which is Mama Gina's book. She's my mentor in this program.
Got it.
So the book Pussy is sitting on my kitchen counter, and my daughter's like, why is there a book called Pussy? What is happening?
Yeah.
Right? And I just love that. I love that I get to answer that question. Like,
how did you answer that question?
Well, my love, we all have one. Well, not all of us in this family. Your brother doesn't. But this book is about reclaiming pussy as power.
Right.
Something that has been demonized, shamed, isolated, taken away by this patriarchy.
So it's a reclaim.
It's a reclaiming of our power, of the divine feminine power.
Goddess culture, they didn't have like phallic symbols. It was the vulva. It was the womb space.
All across the world, in every
curvy
goddess.
Figures.
Yep.
The fertile hips. And
in one of the very first classes that we did, we actually just like had to look at a whole bunch of pictures of the vulva. And she's like, many of you will look and just be like alarmed and just be with that, right? And notice how long it takes you, how many you have to look at to be like, oh, okay, I'm okay with this. Like, we do not celebrate the female body the way that we celebrate the male body.
Oh my gosh. And it's only been getting worse. I have research I've come across, Goddess.
Do you have research on this?
Just would like to chime in on the latest information.
Great.
So basically what's been happening in the last 10 years is that there is an absolute disgust and basically disdain of any mention or looking at or pleasuring of the woman down there. And
you mean in sort of like
in hookup culture or in younger culture, so they've done thousands of interviews with teenagers and young 20s, and so there's not just hookup culture, but it's still quite prominent there. But they're basically like, I don't want to see a pubic hair on her. I don't actually want to see her. I don't want him to see me. Oh, I'll go down on him, but I don't want him to go down on me. I don't want him to see down there. Like, it's like, this is disgusting. And I just, as long as I take care of him, it's good. It's like a blowjob culture. I think you know that. I think that's pretty common knowledge.
Do you remember I had a boyfriend in Toronto who like wouldn't have sex with me, but was like, but you can give me a blowjob. And I was like, oh, okay.
I remember.
Now I'm like, like what? What?
I was never like that.
I mean, again, lots of healing. Do you remember the healing that we did? Just to go back on profound healing moments on this journey. You were there. I had one of my chronic migraines.
Yes.
Yeah. Right? Chronic migraines for my entire marriage. Not saying they're connected.
They didn't happen before. Not much sense. Just saying.
Right. Yeah. And I had this really debilitating 3-day headache. We had sat down, you and I and another friend.
We were going to film something.
We were going to either film something or we were going to plan for the filming.
We had a meeting, a half-day meeting planned, an offsite.
And you looked at me and you were like, Goddess down. And it was all hands on deck. And I laid with my head in your lap, and our friend Kristen and you did a healing. And I saw like a grid, and you saw it. You saw the grid come out of me. It was like a metal grid. And you said it's almost like your nervous system wants to hold on to it because it knows it so well.
And if it lets go of it, there's all this empty space and this flesh that had been embedded on it that's going to be raw. So it doesn't want to let go, but it's like staying with the evil it knows.
Right. It's like having a splinter that's like half out. It hurts.
Yeah. And it's like, I don't want to lose it. It's going to bleed. It's going to be raw flesh and it could be exposed to infection, but you have to get it out of you.
And as I was lying there, I saw every man that I'd ever been with and this whole line, and I just saw like the connection of all of them and the similarities and the kind of like unavailable breadcrumbing, stoic, choose me, be with me on my part. And I just watched them all. And then I saw all the way back to my stepfather and my father.
Every male influence, yeah.
Masculine. And I saw my funeral. and I saw the casket and I saw my soul come out and say, no more. Like, it was just such a profound healing. I'll remember it forever. And I don't have headaches. Knock on wood. I get a few, but not like that.
Not like that ever
Not
again.
like
That was
that.
the last time. Yeah.
And it was really like an operating system recalibration and a real death and rebirth. I'm letting go of the version of myself that she's died.
Yes. And what was the version that was left?
And the version that's left puts her desire front and center and celebrates, right? And is not like, if a guy said to me now, like, you can give me a blowjob, I'd be like,
right.
Well, you can go down on me first and we'll see.
I mean, the woman that did this research, Peggy Ornstein, I think is her last name, in this book called Girls and Sex. I highly recommend it. This was so prominent with girls reporting this, that there is just no talk of the woman's nether regions. Like that she said to the girl, what if your boyfriend said, every time you got together and you sat down anywhere, he's like, you got him a glass of water. And it was just known that you were going to get him a glass of water, but he never got you a glass of water. She was like, hell no, I'm a liberated woman, blah, blah, blah. And she's like, how is this different? And the girls were like, oh, like they could not connect that them always pleasuring their boyfriend but not being pleasured, making sure he came but not worrying about their own orgasm, that was the same as like they in every other way felt liberated, felt like they were feminists, felt like they would never let a boss talk down to them, or that they were going to make as much money as men. And they could not relate. That's how normalized it is. And I find that where patriarchy might be getting exposed and changed in fields like business and work, et cetera, is still there, of course. But when you get into intimacy, the most progressive women, I mean, I would say one of our mutual friends, who's the most feminist maybe of all of us, after her relationship ended, she's like, I was in a 1950s marriage and I didn't know it. I didn't know making dinner every night was him feeling like he was an authority. I didn't know that till we broke up. I didn't know until my ex-husband and I were talking to the mediators during divorce and comparing who should take what. And I was like, why does everything that he did for me have a dollar amount that he wants? And everything that I did for him, he's saying he shouldn't give me anything. And he said, that's just what a wife does.
Yeah.
I'm like, I was in that the whole time. I didn't know. And he was so progressive. He would say, don't take my last name. You're a published author. You're a doctor. Like, you're going, or I was in my doctorate degree. Like, the most progressive relationships still have all of these hidden dynamics.
For sure.
Yeah. And you're basically saying no more.
Yeah. I think even the word pleasure gives people
heebie-jeebies.
the heebie-jeebies.
What do you think's
especially
going
when
on?
it's connected to women. I think it's just
there is
like
no
too much.
Yeah.
Oh, I don't know. Maybe you don't want to go there, right? Why is that?
Too much. That's what comes up? Pleasure, too much.
Well, if it's so normalized to not center our pleasure, and we're suddenly talking about our pleasure as being maybe the central, most important thing in our life.
It could take us to authenticity and fulfillment. And
right. It's a real shaking up of our paradigm to think differently about it.
12,000 years of biological programming tells you if you follow pleasure and not the societal code, you might literally die, be burned as a witch, be ousted, burned at this, like, still there's wife burnings in other countries and all sorts of things. Yeah.
It's really
survival. Like, you're literally, I can feel it in my system. Like, I don't feel this not normally, but when you said, what does it bring up if you were to say pleasure as a woman and you're in that paradigm, I instantly felt terror. And the terror, and I had flashes of maybe past lives or biological programming discharging that basically shows me being tortured, being burned, like,
Yeah, pleasure is dangerous.
Yeah.
So we are decolonizing, as you say.
Yes.
Our pleasure.
Yes.
For ourselves and for the generations to come.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
How would you say you're holding that now? Like, how do you let pleasure lead you? What would you say to people about letting pleasure lead you? You're coming into this. You've done all this work to access this. What is it giving you?
It's giving me like a central database of my body, right? So this is why we talked about like waking up today before we did this. It's raining out. I can't go to the gym. I'm like, well, I can put on a sexy music and I can dance in my laundry. I did a little strip tease for myself.
In the mirror or just?
On my camera. I did a little video
You just hold it for yourself?
Yeah. I just like propped it up because I don't have a full length mirror in this.
Even while you're doing it, do you think one day I'll show this to a guy? Or is there no guy in sight?
There's no guy in sight.
Love it.
This is just for me.
Awesome.
Yeah.
I love it.
And
do you look at it and go, I'm so hot?
Yeah. It's like, it's the feeling in myself. And it's amazing what happens. Like, just put on music, move your body, move your hips, reconnect.
Yeah.
Right? We're so living up here. And so for me, just getting in my body, putting on some music, moving side to side, like sensually, can be soft. It doesn't even need to be sexy per se, right? Just sitting
sensual.
And having sensual, right? That soft touch.
Yes.
And
there's so much there.
Yeah.
There's so much there in terms of like when it's intense and when there's friction and it's fast, just like it's like running through an art gallery. Like instead of stopping and savoring.
I think what's the piece I want to mine from it is like, that is my inner GPS. That connects me to my intuition. Right? How do I get out of my mind? I get into my body, I get connected, and then I'm available and open in a different way. And so it's like when I want to get myself out of the mind, and I want to get more into my intuition, for me, it's about being embodied. And so having that practice,
What if someone like heard that being embodied? What does that mean?
It just means really inhabiting your body, like really.
With your consciousness, with your awareness, being in the sensations.
Yep. Slowing down.
So like if I'm not embodied, I might be thinking about my to-do list and not even noticing that there's a flower in front of me or a friend talking or what I feel while that friend's talking or what I feel while I experience that flower.
Right.
And being embodied is like, oh, when she talked about dancing for the first time in a mirror, that brings up terror in me and I might leave my body and get distracted. So, but if I stay with it and go, when I feel the terror, I feel flashes of being burned and things that must be old because I've never had those experiences. And that allows me to know that's programming and not truth and let it go.
And like, where do you feel that in your body, right? So interesting, we talk about like mindfulness, but mindfulness to me is actually embodiment as well. Like if I can slow down and I can connect to my senses, what do I smell?
Yes.
What do I hear?
Yes.
What do I feel? If I'm talking and something comes up and I say, I'm just going to slow down a beat and like, where am I feeling that? Or you'll say to me, something's coming up or I have a pain. Let's like investigate.
Let's be there. Let's be
slow
with
down
it.
And be with that. What information is my body giving me?
Right. Associations. And when you can witness associations, they discharge and they come out of that shame place and come into that release place. I like this a lot. No, I think this is really true and really, really good. I feel like coming into your body so that you stay and you don't run from the sensations that come up. I hear two things. There's a witness that's experiencing it, and then there's also the experience. And if I can bring in neuroscience.
Of course.
In neuroscience, when you are focusing on especially at least 3 of your sensations at once, your senses. So if you can be looking and hearing and touching at the same time, and you can be aware of the feeling and the other sensations that are happening, you literally go to a different brain region, which is your higher processing, out of your fear and fight and flight center. So you're processing the experience from the most evolved part of your brain that can have the higher perspective, the adult perspective, and it takes it out of the terror that little child might have had. So I always recommend to people like feel that and like put your hand on your heart and listen to beautiful music and feel the warmth of a fire, the softness of the fabric, just some sort of multi-sensory experience. So you can actually meet that and not have to flee it because you actually are resourced with the higher part of yourself to experience it.
And that's what people call regulating your nervous system.
There you go.
Right. That's a tool that we can all use when we feel that triggered. Yeah. Right. We feel that activation, something someone said or a situation I'm in has me feeling like my heart is racing. I want to get out of here. It's like, how can I slow down, take those moments to really like feel into, anchor myself into this moment and into my body. Yeah. I'm safe. It's taking that adult back.
Yeah. And I feel like that's going from a triggered state to a non-triggered state. You said before, and you've said it many times, and I don't know why I'm waiting to this moment to ask, but maybe
Why
this
don't
is
I
the
like
moment.
that word?
Why don't you like the word triggered? You always say that. You're
Yeah.
like, and I never want to interrupt you because you're telling me something so important. You're like, and then I was triggered, which I don't like, but then I'm like, this is not the time.
I've sort of embraced the word now because
But what does it mean to you? Why didn't you like it?
I think it was just at the time, especially, it was a bit of one of those words like, oh, that triggers me when that person, right? People would kind of use the word as.
How did they use it that you didn't like?
So-and-so said this and it triggered me, or
And
it's
what didn't
like
you
a
like about
reaction.
that?
It sort of said to me, like, I don't have agency to respond.
I'm a victim. Does it scream I'm a victim?
Maybe screams victim.
Is that what it is? You don't like, I know that you don't like victim.
I'm less activated by that word now. I'm kind of like, okay, triggered.
Right.
But also when I began to understand, like, what do we mean by that? We mean that my nervous system is activated, that I'm having a physiological response to the circumstances or to the environment or to what something is said. And that is information.
Right.
That maybe not in this moment, but at some point I want to sit with and understand.
Yes.
What is that bringing up in me and why?
Yes.
It's information. Would
you say that you were triggered a lot, or that this 2020 experience was one of your first big triggers, or was that?
I think I was probably triggered a lot, but didn't realize it. But I think for sure it was like an earthquake when that Facebook message came in. It was kind of like, we have these moments in time.
Well, it sounds like to me, you were like, oh, this is a recognizable trigger, which makes me feel like, were you not triggered all the time before that?
I don't know.
Maybe not.
Yeah.
Sounds like it.
Not in that way. Okay. Not in that earth-shattering kind of like, oh.
And what does earth-shattering mean? Like,
it just felt like I don't know. It's like when you get news, I don't know, I'm sure you felt this way, like when your brother died. Like, it's just something that is just like, whoa, the world has changed.
So my brother dying was not a trigger.
Right.
It was, I would never use the trigger with that.
It was like I don't know what the word is then, but it's something that
shattered.
Yes.
Were you shattered?
No, I wasn't shattered.
But this is what I'm realizing, which I never realized. I had extreme PTSD, so I lived a life mostly triggered, and found most of my days were spent not being triggered. And so what you talked about is just like, every 5 minutes. But it sounds to me that you weren't triggered a lot, and maybe that's why you were.
Or maybe I just didn't have the tools and information to understand what that even meant.
Right.
Like I wasn't armed with the skills and the self-awareness to go like, oh, I'm in this conversation and I really want to get out of it. And I don't understand that that's information. Like maybe a boundary's being crossed, or I'm participating in a way that's not healthy. Like I didn't have this data information kind of pathways to understand myself and how I was participating.
Right. Do you feel like maybe you were annoyed about people saying that because you just handled it and you thought they should just be handling it?
Maybe. That would be me. That sounds like me.
Yeah. Okay. I'm getting to the heart of this. Yeah. It sounds like you were just like, you just keep going along and you keep soldiering and
Things happen. We just footnote it. We move on.
You don't announce you're triggered and then try to stop the show.
Maybe. Yeah.
And now you don't have the same dance of it. Yeah. Okay. This is amazing. I feel like I've understood. I've wanted to ask that for so long. Yeah. And it makes perfect sense.
Folks.
Yeah. It makes perfect sense. It sounds like there's some, it sounds like there was some disdain for those that wanted to slow down and work with that. But it also sounds like the bigger disdain is that they took it as a victim and then didn't do the work.
Right. And I've also learned that disdain is actually a good signal for me that there's something to investigate.
Ooh, it's one of your entryways?
Right. Like I'm like, oh, I would never do that. And I'm like, pretty sure I'm going to end up doing it.
Right.
I know that now.
What are your doorways to know that you should stay with it? Like there's times when you go disembodied where you want to escape what's happening. And then there's a time to be embodied and actually do the opposite and lean into it. What would you say you're like, oh, here's that place where I either want to leave my body, but I'm going to stay. What are your signs to stay?
I mean, I think now, if I'm understanding the question right, like when I feel the need, if I feel like I want to get out of something or leave the room, I don't know that I leave my body as much, but I can slow down enough to sort of assess. Like one of the things that happens when you have trauma as a young child, as you know, is that I didn't know to trust the danger signals. So now I listen to the alarm and I go like, oh, is that an alarm I should listen to? Do I need to leave Am I unsafe? I should leave. And I trust that. And even if I get out and I'm like, I didn't need to leave, but you know what? Better that I left. And I trusted that signal because I overrode that signal for so long in order to stay safe, to keep a secret.
Yep. Right.
So I think that's a part of the leaving your body, leaving a situation. I would imagine on the leaving your body part, like I think in sex, I probably left my body most of the time. I think it was probably just easier to leave, to not be present. So that's been part of my process, part of my work, right? To be fully present. The doorways, like when I say disdain, for example, like, there was the sober curious movement and I was a drinker and I'd be like, oh, I'm never doing that. Like, I can't imagine a world in which I don't drink.
Triggers.
Yeah. And literally be like, oh, why does she need to keep talking about that?
Right.
And
about being sober, about being triggered.
About being sober.
Oh my gosh. Interestingly, both triggers and sobered were annoying to you and they both became a huge part of what you dealt with.
Right. And so I always say, like, now I look back and say the things I had disdain for, I actually ended up doing.
I love it.
I probably lived most of my marriage saying I was never going to be divorced. Here I am. Right? Never say never.
I said I was never going to live in LA.
Here you are.
Yeah.
Yeah. So I think never say never. And also when there's disdain for me, it's like, is there something? Is there maybe a little like when we see someone and we're like, oh, I'm a little envious or jealous of them doing that. It's like, oh, what's there for me?
Right.
Is there information here of something that's calling me forward to something that could be on my path?
So it's like almost all these really negative things that people bury and run away from. Like shame is actually the door to liberation. And disdain is actually the door to like staying with and learning. Curiosity. And like jealousy and envy is actually the door to inspiration and possibilities. It's like once we hold these things and use them as avenues and not destinations, they actually become really healthy and useful.
Yeah.
Yeah, I love it. And all of them seem to lead to authenticity and healing and desire.
Yes.
Love it.
Yeah. Thanks for asking.
Yeah, no, really
happy to share.
Yeah, love hearing your journey. And I'm like beyond proud of you for all I've witnessed you do and your hard work.
Thank you.
I mean, you've been doing it for a long time. You were the first of all of us to go to therapy 25 years ago. I remember one of our friends saying, Aine just broke up with so-and-so, and she's amazing. She's
another
like
toxic boyfriend.
And I mean, well, all of us had toxic boyfriends, but you were different. She's like, and she's going to therapy.
Right.
And I was
it wasn't a thing back then. Yeah.
Like you were the first words I ever heard, she's going to therapy, was our mutual friend saying she's going to therapy about it. Yeah. She does the work. And I was like, what is the work? Like, this is like 99. And I'm like, what's the work?
And here we are saying to anyone who will listen, the journey isn't always easy, but it can be beautiful
when we have each other.
Yeah. And that is, the journey is the work.
Yeah.
The journey to know ourselves.
Conscious work. It's the consciousness you bring to the things you want to run away from and use them as doors to transformation and yourself.
Yeah. And knowing and trusting that the work that you're doing, the journey you're on, the healing is actually impacting everyone around you.
Yeah.
That when I go and do retreats or I go, and do this healing work, I know that it's actually healing 7 generations.
Oh my gosh. And like, it's really these doorways that really lead to the abundance of sex, money, and intuition. Like, I don't think you really access great sex without this healing. I don't think you access your wealth, your values aligned wealth.
Totally.
And your magnetism for an ability to hold it and believe you deserve it without it. And you can't access your intuition if you have it blocked off with trauma. Right. And I saw a great post by an actual a professional intuitive that I really respect and like, and she does business in life as well, which is really rare. She's about 20 years younger than me. I really respect everything she posts. And she said, I'm kind of heartbroken by watching a lot of coaches think that they had their awakening or their first training and they're putting themselves out there. And I'm watching the people come from them really damaged. And she's like, just because you've, got a paper or you have a piece of wisdom doesn't mean you're ready to hold people through the fire. She said, real coaching, really being able to be there for someone, is going through lifelong series of initiations that have you mine your deepest traumas and then up-level your practice, and then mine another deep trauma and up-level your practice. And I will say every round of clients I have, I'm working with them on something I just came out of, using tools I just honed for myself. And then I'll end up, changing again. And then I've stopped clients entirely to do my whole year of healing, and then taken on clients again that are dealing with the same thing. So
yeah, I mean, I said I didn't take on any clients last year. I was like, it would be like drowning and someone throws me a baby. Like I can't hold space for anyone when I am doing this fundamental foundational work.
Yeah.
And knowing and trusting, because so much of what we do is holding space and having that incredible ability, these initiations, these, rites of passage to be able to guide people through their own experiences.
Yes.
And know that sometimes we got to just do our own work, take
Absolutely.
the time.
Well, and even being shown 7 years ago that it was time to scale my work, and part of that was going to be putting out books and videos about my wisdom and what I do. And I just remember terror. And I'm going to say almost every day I've done an hour to 3 hours of some form of intense therapy, healing, meditation, journaling, something around the fear of being attacked by putting myself out there. And I can say easily that I'm at a zero concern about it, like a zero. But I would say 7 years of daily work got me here. And I love when Taylor Swift says, you see me getting this award for the good idea I had, but there's a lot of bad ideas. I don't think you can, their words, I don't think you can even imagine what she's really saying, because you're seeing me sit in front of a camera now and talk so naturally and easily. This is 7 years of daily work of deep, deep trauma healing, of being attacked, of being beaten when I was little for being who I am, like, and facing all of the actual visceral experience of being attacked, plus thousands of years of patriarchy that says, don't put yourself out there as a woman, plus actual real women attacking me and sending me letters and on Facebook and things. So it's been all around me, and I had to come to a place where I'm impenetrable to that. But it is years of work, and I can
say daily work still, right? I think that's the other thing, is that as we do this work, it's not just like, it's a muscle.
Maybe. I mean, I don't feel it right now at all. And I'll maybe part of this will be, this is what brought that back. This is the interesting thing, is I feel like when you start this kind of healing, you go, I'm going to get rid of it. It's going to be gone. And then you really get into it and you're like, it's never gone. It's just another layer, another layer, another layer.
The onion. The endless onion.
The endless. And I will say, surprisingly, there are things that have been gone for a while that haven't come back for a while. And I do feel, and I do get, there are some things that end. Like, we have some things we're meant to wrap up in this lifetime, and we have some things that will take many lifetimes. And but I feel like there was many things that haven't come up in all sorts of ways they could be provoked. And it'll be interesting. I'll always claim like, it's coming up again. But there's some things, and I feel like the attack one might be done. Well, maybe famous last words, but like, I really feel like it is at a zero on it. And it's interesting that now's the time we're doing this. But there is so much work that goes before it. And I'm glad that you were so vulnerable to share. And I got to really, as your friend, like, understand, even though we've talked about this so much, and I was, hearing about it in real time and in experiences after, but I got more. And I feel like I'm sure a lot of people got, a lot of reveals about their own history that they've swept under the rug in actual real tools. If you could say like 3 takeaways of, if anyone was watching this and they're just starting to realize that they've swept some things under the rug and they go disembodied and they don't have access to their pleasure, what would you share with them? If they could take away anything from this, what would it be?
I mean, I think my real message is like, just trust yourself and listen, right? Create practices to become more self-aware, to begin to trust and let go of the things, right? We hold on to our identities, to the things around us that we think make us who we are. And if there's one thing I've learned in this last few years, it's like, loosen the grip and let go of what's no longer aligned, and let the version of you that wants to be alive come forward, and surround yourself with people who can guide you through the process. You don't have to go through the forest alone. I had a council of women, my wisdom council through this whole process, including a therapist,
deprogramming,
best friend, right? Women who, ironically, I remember my ex saying like, they just tell you what you want to hear. And I was like, actually the opposite, right? They are really there to reflect.
I am certainly not telling you what you want to hear, best friend.
No.
I'm like, you don't want to hear this.
Right.
Yeah.
But truly just knowing that if you don't have a circle yet, you can create it. You can find and reach out, start with a therapist. And, what creates connection is vulnerability, that we all have things that we think no one else has experienced. And the more we're willing to share, we do really create true connection. And it's what's missing. We're so connected with social media and the internet, and yet we're all really craving true connection.
Right.
So
and I think you can really recognize those people. Like what I'm hearing from your story and from my own experiences, if it feels unsafe, go and get curious about it really truly being unsafe. Don't go, what's wrong with me?
Yeah.
And if you feel unclear and clouded and you don't have access to the truth, then just know that you are confused and you want to seek clarity. And if there's someone that comes into your life and you're like, oh, I feel clear, recognize that you feel clear and keep being with them.
Yeah.
Like we've always made each other feel more clear. There's friends that I talk to. Wendy from the beginning in high school was like, every time I got off the phone with her, I felt more clear. Mm-hmm. Just start to recognize those people and pull them close.
And start asking, like, what do I desire?
Yeah.
And calling that in. Again, asking the field to give you answers, right? Putting the question, like, show me what's possible. If you're making it work at home, if you're in a relationship that isn't fulfilling, if you're feeling that kind of like, I should, or, especially we grappled with like, the kids and marriage and what's right and what's good for them and all those things that are very real, and just really being curious about like, where am I putting my needs on this table of everyone else's needs? And there's no wrong, but just maybe start to acknowledge it to begin with, and then asking like, what do I desire? And am I willing to put my needs at the front of that conversation?
Mm-hmm. Beautiful.
Yeah.
Love that. Great place to leave things.
Thanks, Goddess.
Thank you, Goddess.
Great. That was a wonderful conversation. That's the Everyday Magic podcast for today. Thanks for being here with us. Don't forget to like, follow, and subscribe so you don't miss an episode. And we'll see you next time.